We have more ways to connect with other human beings than any generation in the history of the planet. More dating apps, more social media platforms, more DMs, more swipes, more let's link up messages than our grandparents could ever have imagined. And somehow we are the loneliest generation that has ever existed. Nearly half of all American adults are single right now. 117 million people. And 80% of Gen Z say that they're emotionally burnt out from dating. 8 out of 10 young people trying to find love are exhausted from the process of looking for it. So today, we're going to talk about why modern dating is broken. What psychology says is actually happening inside of your brain when you swipe through these apps, and most importantly, what you can do to stop playing a game that was designed for you to lose. Let me start by saying that dating apps, they were not designed to help you find love. They were designed to keep you searching for it. If you're someone who actually found true love in one of these apps, then congratulations, you're like the 1%, and this video is not really directed towards you. But to the other 99%, I want you to think of it like this. If Tinder, Bumble, or Hinge actually matched you with your soulmate on the first week, you would delete the app. You would never open it again. You would never pay for premium. You would never boost your profile. And their entire business model, well, it collapses. The online dating industry made $3.4 billion in the United States alone last year. That's billion with a B. That's not a love industry. That is an attention industry. And you're not the customer. You are the product. Your loneliness is their revenue. Your hope is their subscription model. And every time that you think, well, maybe the next swipe will be different, well, you're doing exactly what the algorithm was built to make you do. Stay on the app. Keep swiping. Keep praying. Your grandparents met at a church picnic and stayed married for 50 plus years? And you've been on Tinder, on Hinge for 11 months, and your longest conversations was whether, pineapple belongs on pizza? These apps, they were never supposed to work for you. They were supposed to work on you. And here's where the psychology gets really interesting. There is a concept called the paradox of choice. A psychologist named Barry Schwartz studied this, and he found that when people are given too many options, they don't get happier. They get more anxious. They become less satisfied with whatever they chose because in the back of their mind, they're thinking, well, what if there's something better one more swipe away? And that is exactly what dating apps do to your brain. Researchers found that the more profiles people were shown, well, the more likely they were to reject everyone. Not because the people were not good enough, but because the unlimited access to options literally rewired their brain into a rejection mindset. You're not even evaluating people anymore. You're dismissing them. You're not looking for a reason to say yes. You're scanning for a reason to say no. And the worst part is that you don't even realize that it's happening. You think you're being selective. You think you have high standards, but there's a difference between having high standards and having an inability to commit to anything because your brain has been trained to believe that the next option might be slightly better. Studies show that dating app users report significantly higher levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness compared to people who don't use them at all. Now, let me say that again. The thing you downloaded to feel less alone is significantly making you feeling more alone. Now, I want to pivot to social media. You see, social media has completely destroyed our ability to be real with each other. Think about how many couples you see on Instagram who look absolutely perfect online. The matching outfits, the sunset photos, the long captions about how in love they are. And then 3 weeks later, they break up and delete every picture like that person never existed. See, we're not building relationships anymore. Most people are just building content. I've seen couples arguing at a club, then posting a picture at the club the next day with a caption, "Amazing night with my forever." Bro, you were screaming at each other last night. We've gotten so good at faking it that we've forgotten what the real thing even looks like. Now, real quick, before I keep going, because this next part, well, it's the one that really changes things. If you're watching this and it's already making you think differently about how you've been approaching dating, then go and follow me on Instagram right now. I post daily reels and stories over there that don't necessarily make it here on YouTube. I'm talking about raw, unfiltered, real talk about relationships and becoming a better version of yourself. I'm going to go ahead and leave the link to my Instagram down in the description below and on the pinned comment as well. So give me a follow because I promise your feed is about to get a whole lot more honest. Now, let's get back to this video because we haven't even talked about the biggest problem yet. Now, the biggest reason modern dating is broken, it's not the apps, it's not social media, it's not even the culture. The biggest reason is that most people are trying to find the right person without first becoming the right person. And I say that with love because I've been that guy. I've been the person thinking, why can't I find someone who's loyal? Someone who is emotionally mature, someone who is a woman of God. The whole time I wasn't asking myself the more important question, am I that person? Would I date me? A Pew Research study found that 62% of singles say they want a committed, exclusive relationship. 62%. That means the majority of people out here, well, they actually do want real love. They want monogamy. They want something deep and lasting. But wanting it and being ready for it are two completely different things. You can't attract what you're not. You can't expect loyalty from someone when you haven't built the kind of life that loyalty wants to call home. And this is where I think that most dating advice on the internet gets it completely wrong. See, everyone is teaching you how to attract a partner, but nobody's teaching you how to become someone worth staying with. Nobody's teaching you how to be emotionally available, how to communicate when things get hard, how to love someone on the days when love doesn't feel exciting anymore or easy or cinematic. We have a whole generation of people who know how to get a date, but have absolutely no idea how to keep a relationship alive past 3 months. And that's not their fault. Nobody taught them. But at some point, you have to stop blaming the system and start building the skills. Many of you have removed God from the equation and then wonder why the math doesn't add up. James 1:17 says, every good and perfect gift is from above. See, love is supposed to be one of those gifts, but we've taken something sacred and handed it to an algorithm. We've outsourced one of the most important decisions of our entire life to a piece of software that ranks us by attractiveness and proximity. We're choosing the person we might spend the next, 50 years with based on 6 photos and a bio that says funny, outgoing, and loves tacos. Now, I'm not saying you can't meet someone online. People do. Real relationships, well, they start on apps probably every day. But I'm saying that if your approach to finding love begins and ends with a screen, you're skipping the part that actually matters. The internal work, the prayer, the patience, the trust that what's meant for you won't pass you by if you stop doom swiping for 5 minutes and start investing in yourself. So here's what I want you to take from this video. Modern dating is broken, but you're not. The system is designed to keep you anxious, keep you searching. Understand that you've been playing a game with rules that were written by people who profit from your loneliness. So here's what you do instead. You get off the apps for a while. Not forever, but for a while. Just long enough to remember who you were before an algorithm told you your value was based on how many, matches you get in a week. You instead start investing in your friendship, your health, your faith, and your purpose. You become the kind of person that the right partner will be lucky to find. You work on your patience, you work on your communication, you work on the wounds from your past that you've been pretending that don't affect your presence, because they do. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says he has made everything beautiful in its time. That includes your love story. So stop rushing it, stop forcing it, stop letting a broken system convince you that something is wrong with you because your timeline doesn't match someone else's highlight reel. Your person is coming, but they're not coming to find a profile. They're coming to find a person. So go become one worth finding. If this video hit different, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been, on dating apps for way too long. Someone who's burnt out. Someone who forgot that they deserve something real. Send them this video. And if you got any value out of this video, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Let's go.